This is Two on One, 2020's number one ranked midweek talk show about theology and pop culture, hosted by two Disciples of Christ ministers who were ordained in the last 10 years. I'm the Reverend Arthur Stewart, one of your co hosts, joined today with and by the Reverend Stephanie Kendall.
Hey, that's me.
Stephanie, how are you today?
I'm okay. Arthur, it's been a long night. As we both know, I am very politically active, very politically minded, and it was like Christmas. it's been a little bit like Christmas these last 2 days, or these last 12 hours, let's call it.
I woke up today and it was like running downstairs to see if Santa came. And the whole time I was working out, I'm like doing sit-ups and I'm like, please let Ossoff win. Please let
You're like 1 Kornacki, 2 Kornacki. Because I count everything in Kornackis because I realize, and this is a weird thing, like, I've been really, we're all, I think, really tense, right? About like everything that is happening. And I have found a little bit of comfort in my beloved Steve Kornacki. I'm an MSNBC girl. I will name that. Like, that's where I get my news primarily from. And so when Steve came on, though, and just like started talking about like, here's the numbers, here's what's happening, I was like, I feel a sense of calm. And honestly, I hope, I was thinking about this last night as, like 2:00 in the morning when Steve's still going. I was like, I hope that my work sometimes brings that sense, or at some point brings that sense of like calm and truth and reciprocity of understanding that his work is important to my work, and that my work brings ease to someone else's work, that there's a chain and a connectedness. So I was just like really grateful, like having a real theological moment at 2:00 in the morning about Steve Kornacki.
Well, we should invite him. We should invite him on and talk about corduroys.
Talk about Gap.
Yeah. Hey, so I do want to bring up today. So, like, thank you. We are on podcasts now on every platform imaginable. You can download this show and listen to it, which is marvelous if you can't catch us live and don't want to look at me leaning in and out of the camera.
Yes.
I think I'm green on the script. Number 2. Jeff Wonrow Designs is our lead sponsor of Two on One, and they are celebrating 15, possibly 16 now, years of making ordinary time extraordinary time.
And Arthur, we are back in ordinary time for 20 minutes, because Ash Wednesday is on February 17th, folks. It is just around the corner.
And then Lent.
And
Lent is another purple season, which means patience and preparation and anticipation.
We've got Lent covered. We just survived those Georgia runoffs.
Amen.
Amen. And as you all listeners and viewers at home are preparing for Lent, maybe give up having ordinary liturgical textiles as a spiritual practice and refresh your vestments and banners with some beautiful craftsmanship from Jeff Wonrow Designs.
Oh, I see what you did there. For 15 years, the creative team at Jeff Wonrow Designs has been handcrafting liturgical textiles. Their processional banners and seasonal banners grace sanctuaries across the country. Their frontals and paraments adorn altars and lecterns in churches of all sizes.
And clergy, Arthur, love their pastor stoles. I know you do. And everyone else, they have deacon stoles and chasubles and copes and other vestments from a variety of traditions, which you know that I love. They cater to Episcopals and Presbyterians and Methodists and ELCA Lutherans, United Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ, Unitarian and Roman Catholic, not to mention interfaith and non-denominational clergy.
So whether you're shopping for the smallest altar accessory or like a liturgical face mask, because that's something we're going to need for a while, or if you're reevaluating your entire collection of vestments and paraments, Jeff Wonrow Designs would be honored to work with you to create something perfect.
So we hope that you will go to jeffwonrow.com for a catalog of stoles, investments, paraments, and banners, along with ordering information and customization possibilities.
And if you enter the code 2on1, all one word at checkout, you can get 15% off your stoles order.
Ooh, I love that. And I know I talked to Jeff, and that is the best deal on the internet for Jeff Wonrow stoles. So after all of the holiday sales and everything, if you did not get that new stole you wanted for Christmas, hop on over to jeffwonrow.com, jeffwunrow.com to get 15% off. To get 15% off your next stoles order by using the code 2on1, all one word.
All right, well, it's time to bring in our guest.
I'm so excited about our guest.
I'm so excited too. We welcome Ellie Roscher with us today. There she is. All right, Ellie, hi. Welcome to Two on One.
Hi, it's so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're so glad to have you.
Yeah.
Tell us about yourself. Who are you? What are you doing here?
My name is Ellie Roscher. I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with my spouse and two kids. I have a 4 and a 6-year-old who are joyful and delightful. I am right now, in part because of COVID, a gig lady. I am a freelance writer and teacher and theologian. So I teach writing at the Minnesota Writing Project and at the Loft Literary Center. I teach yoga at Up Yoga in Minneapolis. And until September, I was working at Bethlehem Lutheran Church in Minneapolis. And then because of a bunch of COVID related things, I had to resign, and I'm facilitating online kindergarten and taking care of my 4-year-old, and then kind of getting to do some fun gigs as a theologian as well. So I'm a freelance theologian, I guess, these days. So yeah, that's a bit of.
Also, Ellie, what happened yesterday? What came out yesterday?
Yesterday, I had a book come out. It's called 12 Tiny Things. We launched it on January 5th, which is one of the reasons I'm thinking a lot about New Year's resolutions. So this is a book I co-wrote with Heidi Barr, who is a wellness coach, and we're really, really excited about it.
And where can people get that book?
So we have a great website that we've built. It's tinythings.com. And there's a whole page on that website about the book and where you can order it from. We did our launch at a really incredible local bookstore, independent bookstore in Minneapolis called Moon Palace. So they have signed copies. But there's also other links of other places that you can buy it on that page as well.
Awesome. We'll make sure to link to all of that on all of our socials when we put this out for all of our viewers.
Thank you. That's awesome.
I did not know you were in Minneapolis, and now I want to talk to you about how wonderful that city is, but I will wait to do that till we're done recording. Okay, so the topic that you've chosen, which is perfect for the beginning of the year, today is Epiphany. We're 6 days in, is New Year's resolutions. So what's your history with New Year's resolutions?
Okay, here's my history. So I grew up Catholic. I say that badass feminist nuns raised me and raised me well. And so I think one of the reasons I've thought a lot about New Year's resolutions is because of the deep ritual in that tradition and how much I attached to it with my personality. So think about Lent. Growing up through Lent as a Catholic, we didn't eat meat on Fridays. I always loved giving up things for Lent. I was very good at this. And so as a child, I would give up chocolate and soda, eating between meals. And it got a little aggressive of how much I would try to give up for Lent, and kind of liked the saints that would be famous for deprivation, right? But then also in high school, the priest in high school actually talked about, during Lent, we would have communal confession, and he talked about reconciliation as a sacrament, as like a spiritual check-in, just a time every year to do a little gut check and be like, how is your relationship with God? How is your relationship with your body as a spiritual being? And are there little shifts that you can make? So that had a lot to do with informing my New Year's resolutions. I kind of get pretty intense about it. And I recently, as an adult, had a coach who said, your personality type likes to overindulge and underindulge. So things like New Year's resolutions, I take on 100%. And so I am a little bit critical of New Year's resolutions, in part because my personality does something way too big, and then I burn out about 20 days in, and then I go into a deep shame cycle, and it doesn't actually help, right? So what I love about New Year's resolutions is it is a chance for a reset, right? It's a natural time to reflect on the year behind us, look forward to the year in front of us. I think as a theologian, I love New Year's resolutions as a moment to think about rebirth, how we die and rise again. And there's an opportunity to do that every morning and every breath. And I do love that aspect of my childhood of doing some of these resets communally. So I would always go and talk to my priest for the sacrament of reconciliation one-on-one, but we did it in a big group of people, and it was powerful watching other people do that, even though you didn't hear their conversation. So I do sense in our society a hunger for reset, a hunger for time of reflection. And I also think we're hungry to have both an individual and a communal aspect to that rebirth, if that makes sense. So the liturgical calendar I've always been interested in as something that repeats and comes around and we can try again. And I also think that as humans, we mark time, right? It's important for us to mark time, and New Year's is a very clear marking on the path, right? So it's an opportunity to put down a post and to start again, and have a fresh start. And I think especially during COVID, that's difficult, right? That because we're not gathering in person in the same way, we're marking time differently. Like I think about funerals and weddings and some of these really important markings of time, high school graduation that we're used to doing communally that we've had to get really creative about. And even in my having to resign from my job, it was really hard for that to be during COVID when I didn't get to say goodbye to actual faces. And I kind of just exited stage left very quietly. And I had to ritualize that and mark that time on my own. And so I think New Year's this year felt big. It felt big for a lot of reasons. I think in Minnesota, we're shifting where there's a little bit more sunlight every day. There's things shifting in our country. There's more vaccines going out every day. So there's a lot of things that seem to be shifting in this year in particular, where folks were looking forward to a hard reset and an opportunity to live into this idea of death and new life, like small r resurrection.
Okay. No, that's
Amazing.
That's amazing. I have like 80 questions in response to that.
Fantastic.
So I think the trick with resolutions, and I think you were kind of talking about that, is there's this hopefulness that we have to engage in. But I like that you've paired reflection with resolution. I don't think that's the I do know people who are like on December 29th, I'm going to lose 40 pounds next year. How?
Yeah.
If you're not losing any weight now, how are you changing things radically?
Just gonna chop off an arm.
Well,
that would do it.
I'll tell you, a few years ago, I was sitting in a bar in Addison, Texas, which has since shut down. I got word that their last day in business was December 31st from like 10 of my friends because they were like, "Do you think it's because you moved?" Which is kind of sad, but Spiff knows that's where I held office hours forever. But I was sitting in that bar and I was like, I'm going to learn Spanish. I downloaded Duolingo. I never took a class. I never bought a workbook. I never learned anything about verbs. I was just like, I'm going to learn Spanish. And I held on to it for like 3 months where I'm like, why don't I know more Spanish? Because I put no effort into it. And I'm a 7 on the Enneagram, which means the idea of something is just as good as the accomplishment of something. And it's so damn dangerous because thinking I was going to learn Spanish literally, like, why do the work in between? It's going to feel the same.
Totally. And I'm a 3, so I'll do the things that I know I can accomplish. And that is very much for me. Like, I won't start things if I don't feel like they are within my grasp. Well, I'm getting better at it because as you grow and reflect, I get better at learning that, failure isn't necessarily a failure, right? Like there is growth and reflection and that there is something to gain and, for lack of a better term, achieve through failure. Like I get to still do some, even if the achievement is a finishing. And so, but for me, like for years, so I'll just name, I don't do New Year's resolutions on New Year's. I've kind of renamed them something else. For me, what I do is I do what I call resurrection resolutions. So I start at Lent trying the thing that on Easter I'm going to commit to. And so that's what I have done for years, is that like but it's tied to the new year, because the new year is when I have looked back on the past, take inventory of who I am, what I want, who God is calling me to be, kind of the little nuances. It's what I really appreciated you when I were talking earlier about your book. Because I'm someone that loves to cast lofty goals and big things. And I often think that the work that accompanies that also needs to be that big. And so what I appreciated about 12 Tiny Things is that it kind of nuanced, certain areas of your life, and said, like, here's how you can reflect and do small, or your language, tiny things that make really big impact for your life. And so I really appreciated that. It's like, it's not an overarching thing. It's not this big umbrella tiny thing, but here's a tiny thing within community. Here's a tiny thing within whatever, all of the little spaces that you name, that help me do that. So that's part of my New Year's, is more of a reflection and vision casting, so that, February 17th, which is Ash Wednesday, is just around the corner. And that's the day that I really kind of start to commit to what is this year calling me to be, and what is God calling me into, to do that. So, and I've had successful years and I've had unsuccessful years, but that's okay too. And that's part of why I don't know, it's why I like and don't like resolutions, right? Like,
Totally.
So for those of us who do not have an advanced reader copy and instead are relying on our local bookshop to provide and procure one, no, I'm just teasing. What are the 12 tiny things? Like, can you share with us a couple of those? Would you mind?
Sure. Yeah. So we took 12. The reason that 12 is because this is a Facebook community that has existed for 3 years. And we would pick a theme and focus on it for a month. So there'd be one tiny thing that we would try. And so the idea is that you could take a year. So there's a lot of folks that are going to work through the 12 Tiny Things book in the year 2021. Yeah. So there are chapters that are really tangible, kind of more ordinary or mundane things like work, home, food, nature. And then there are chapters that are a little bit more intangible, like creativity, sensuality, spirituality. And so you could pick a chapter that is an area of your life that you really know that you want to focus on, or you can work through beginning to end and kind of pick and choose what you want. So the idea is, we were hearing from a lot of folks, for me at Bethlehem and for the Wellness Culture clients, we're feeling super overwhelmed to the point of feeling paralyzed. And I do think that that has something to do with how many of us pick up our phone first thing in the morning, and we know all of the brokenness in the whole earth before we get out of bed, right? So that's not all of it, but I think that's part of it, that we're coming into our identity as global citizens in a world that's really hurting. We're not sure where our entry point is in that. Mm-hmm. And so the idea with a tiny thing is, and this goes back to New Year's resolutions, I don't like resolutions in the fact if you're grasping for something outside of you, and that the core of it is that I am not enough and I'll be more enough if I do this thing, like if I lose weight, for example, right? Tiny Things is the opposite, where it's a root building system that is assuming everything that you need is already inside of you. You are perfectly imperfect. If you do these tiny things, you will just deepen your roots, and then you can live out of a more centered, intentional life. Oh, so cool. A tiny thing it's so offensively tiny that you can't tell me you're too busy. Okay, so like that's kind of the trick of if it's tiny enough. So in the spirituality chapter, the tiny thing is taking 3 conscious breaths every day. Okay, that's so offensively tiny, you can't tell me you don't have time to do that. But for me, when I take 3 conscious breaths every day for a month, that automatically turns into 4 breaths or 5 breaths, or I take 3 conscious breaths 8 different times a day. And every time that I do that, I get back in touch with my root system, and it shifts something, right? One of the tiny things is to look up. So look up from your phone or your computer, and then look all the way up. So once a day, this is one of my favorite ones. Once a day, I go outside and I look all the way up at the sky. Now, it's a tricky tiny thing because it's implying that you went outside. right? So like that's big for me to remember that you're a creature. As soon as I look up, my face changes, my shoulders change. I feel connected to the earth and I feel small in relation to the universe. And no matter what day it is or what season, what I see when I look up is beautiful. So instantly I remember that I'm a creature. I remember that I'm created by God. I remember that I'm in a web of life that is way bigger than me. And it kind of rightly situates me in my day so that I can move on. So that exercise, that tiny thing can take 10 seconds, but every single time that I do it, it helps. So this is not the silver bullet, right? It's not the only answer, but it's kind of an accompanying piece that you can build up a spiritual practice with the tiny things that you know work for you, how you are wired.
So it's a moving away from doing or thinking or feeling and more into becoming.
That's exactly right.
So it's more transformative than I guess productive.
Yes, that's right.
I'll tell you, last year I was like, I'm going to become better at prayer, and I actually ordered books and used them. It's Macrina Whitaker in Seven Sacred Pauses, which Jen Hatmaker recommended it, and I talked like we're friends. We're not yet, but we will be.
She
And
makes us feel like we're all her friend, right?
she is such a hot mess in the best possible way.
I love her to death. I
And
do.
this book on the hours, and it was just kind of perfect because Jen Hatmaker was like, I just set alarms, and I stop, and it takes 3 minutes, and I would miss the alarm over and over. And actually, Spiff, I want you to know I've moved my midday prayer up to 11 noon central so that I can pray before we sign on to do the show.
Which I love. I was just going to ask, like, so part of, what we talk about here is the church, obviously. And so, it which is rooted in scripture. So I guess, Ellie, in your understanding of New Year's resolutions and how you've kind of built this kind of accompanying book to say, like, you're enough, all of these things, what is the relationship to it with something like the Jeremiah passage that's like God guides our steps, like we plan our vision and God guides our steps? In your experience or just opinion, what is the relationship to God's movement in these kind of tiny spaces?
Yeah, that's beautiful. So for me, the tiny things are a way to help quiet yourself so you can hear God's voice or you can feel that step, right? When I talk to those folks who are saying, I am paralyzed with overwhelm, they explain kind of this white noise feeling that has like almost a physical weight to it. And that those people are experiencing a disconnect from the sense of divine, right, in themselves and in the world. And so that God guiding our steps isn't I don't want to say working, but there's something off there, right? And so this is a way to build some intentionality into our days and to quiet that white noise so that we can discern it, that we can hear God, that we can sense what that next step is, if that makes sense. And so some folks are going to experience the tiny things as very ritualistic. Some of them feel that way. Others feel like habit stacking, right? But it's hopefully a tiny move that can open us up to the fact that we're created, that we're loved, that we're enough, and that quiets some of these myths, and so that we can hear God's true voice. So I'll give another example. The first chapter is on space.
Mm-hmm.
So I challenge folks, where in your life do you want to create more space? Is it in your closet or your digital files or your calendar? For me, it's my calendar. I always overfill my calendar. And the lie underneath that is that I am what I do. And so I have to be busy to be enough. And when I can say,
welcome to that Enneagram 3 life.
Right? I'm a wing 3. I'm a 2 wing 3. So I totally.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Yep.
So if I can create space on my calendar and dwell in that space, then I'm going to be able to discern God's step and how to fill that and live a life that is inspired by God and not reactionary to the world, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. For me, like I was just, for whatever reason, reading that Jeremiah passage the other day, and it like came to me as I was prepping for this interview. And so you know, what I like about that passage and what I don't like about that passage, and what I think ties into New Year's resolutions, is very much that, like, we are active participants in it, right? Like, you don't get this, the God guiding your steps is all well and good, but like, you have to walk. And like, that God can't guide your steps if you aren't walking.
God will not perp you to the next phase of your life.
What?
God will not perp walk you to the next phase of your life.
That's right. That's right. So the visual that keeps coming back to me at 12 Tiny Things is the folks are telling me they're stuck on their couch. And our communities are not benefiting from that, right? So 12 Tiny Things is trying to invite folks to get into their root system, become more awake to their lives, get up off of the couch, take that first step, and then the second step will emerge, right? But like you said, God can only guide if you're moving. I love that. So, but I do think that there's a part of the brokenness in the world that is legitimately overwhelming. And so can we make our jurisdiction smaller to our local bodies and take that first tiny step so that God has some momentum to shift and move us? I love that. And I also think, tying it back to New Year's resolutions, I was thinking about like the huge resets that we put on a pedestal, like Paul or Lazarus or Jesus. You know, we have these big reset moments in our Bible that we put on a pedestal, and that has never spoken to me in my spiritual journey. My spiritual journey is all about mini detours, right? And not these huge cataclysmic moments. And so I'm looking for the Bible characters that have the small r reset, right? The small r resurrection. And that's another reason why I'm totally going to steal your idea about Lent and having a season of reflection before setting something. That's so beautiful, because it's more of the
yeah, because you set these lofty goals and you're like, okay, I'm gonna run every day, but it's like, okay, how long are you gonna run? Yeah. Where are you gonna run? You know, and so for me, that's what the preparedness of Lent does, so that when I hit Easter and I'm like, okay, my body can take 2 miles a day for, you know, arbitrary numbers, but like, yeah, I tried 5 and I tried 1. Let's settle on something, because it's about the sustainability of these commitments that we're making.
And I want to chime in here because I think I'm the only person in this conversation who does make New Year's resolutions. I also make resurrection resolutions. I also make birthday resolutions. About every 4 months, I'm
starting something new.
But so my sister's a runner and I'm not. I only run if something's chasing me, and even then, I just have to outrun somebody else. And it's so. I'm like, I should run because I can swim and I can bike. So like, maybe
that triathlon life is right around the corner for you.
When I'm 40, right? Because I'm not doing it this year. But like, if I don't know how to run, I'm not going to do a triathlon. So there you go. I'm telling my sister her birthday is in a few weeks. I'm buying running shoes and I'm doing Couch to 5K. I will do a 5K. And I'll say it so that people can hear me say it. In 2021, I will do a 5K. It might be on a treadmill.
I'll do a 5K with you. You want to do it together?
Yeah, let's do that.
I'll do. Yeah.
Let me know.
Well, see,
all of our viewers, let us know if you are, the 2-on-1 5K.
Yeah.
Oh, can we call it the 2 + 2 on 1? Because then it'll be 5K. But the other thing in it is and I'm sorry, I'm jumping all over. I'm not though, but maybe I am. My husband and I started gardening last year. And I've said I would love gardening if it were indoors. I have a witty thing for all of my proclivities, apparently. And it was a simple garden. We had mutant zucchini and some herbs and tomatoes that just didn't make it. And and also like the most random watermelon. Anyways, that was the first step for us.
Yeah.
The step this year is we're tearing up part of our front yard because we hate yards. They're immoral. And we are going to build one big planter.
Ooh.
Eventually we're going to have a garden, like one that we're going to be those neighbors who've like escalated a tree against the wall, side of the house. But like, so with these 12 tiny things, they have to be practiced, but it's cultivating not only the habit of doing said 12 tiny things, it's cultivating the change in mind about it. Like you talked about the breaths and the looking up. What have you found? What is the community, the Facebook group? How have people launched into something new from practicing these breaths or from looking up?
Yeah, the our moving metaphor through the book is root system. We use the aspen tree roots, right? So if you're deepening your roots, you're going to find connection with your community. So that's super important. In our Facebook group, we'll have the theme. So this is what I've now started to do. Instead of New Year's resolutions, I'll pick one word for the year, and then that starts to play out into tiny action steps that can build on each other, right? So in the Facebook group, there'll be a theme, and you start to see what you're looking for, if that makes sense. So when there's a one word focus on the month, you start to look for it, and then you start to see it, you start to make connections, you pick your tiny thing, and it is meant to then create space where you can either dwell in that space or fill that space more intentionally. Instead of life happening to you, you are claiming your life. So you're living in the present moment, a little bit simpler, a little bit more intentionally, and then you're making choices that are working for you, that build. So the goal is that, yes, if you start with your body and you feel more awake and there's space in your life, there's potential and power in that, then what you're going to do moving forward is going to be more authentic, and our communities will ultimately benefit from that. So in practicality, the Facebook group looks like folks trying on different tiny things, sharing resources, sharing songs and articles and podcasts. So we're all thinking about the same thing and seeing what comes up and where connections are made, and sharing ideas, because there's like an appendix of tiny things in the back of this, but it's not exhaustive. So we're constantly learning what other people's what works for other people. And it can't turn into a to-do list, right? So it can't be too many tiny things, or it stops being tiny. But hopefully you can kind of take what works for you, and then in just doing that every day, you feel like you're living a more intentional life, one day at a time.
I really appreciate. I not to spoil, but we shared it with our viewers earlier that your one word this year is love, and I really appreciate these kind of large, abstract kind of concepts, because they get to be our community. Our church community right now is doing Star Words, and everyone, for the very first time, this community is doing that. And so I was like, I'll do mine for everyone. You can all see how it's done. And I was like, and very much I was like, I want to hit like a couple of them, see which one works best. And I was like, don't do that. You're just going to hit it once, and that's what it's going to be. And weirdly enough, my word was be, and which for me was like really good to be present. And yes, it's exactly to build a hive in my New York City apartment. And so, but like to really be present in all of that. And I appreciated that. And especially I was looking forward to this conversation because, as you know, Arthur just kind of committed himself to a 5K online, to like for accountability. One of the questions that, in our ID graphic that we shared, and you were like, I asked what show you looked for, did you like of New Year's resolutions? And you said Friends. And so we've not done a Friends episode yet, although I feel like it's in the lexicon of society, so people know.
Yeah.
No, you. If I say we were on a break, Arthur, you have no idea what I'm talking about.
No, I've seen all of Friends.
Okay.
They're kind of the worst people.
Yeah. And so this is what I really liked about Ellie's answer on that was like, there's this episode for Friends that has like all of the, the New Year's resolutions. And, part of it is like, they're going to support each other, but also they know each other so intimately that it's like, they resolve into old habits, things like that. And so I'm wondering, a question for both of you is like, in your experiences of change, how has community supported you, or how has community held you back in spaces of your own personal growth? And I can just name for my own self, I'm a very high energy person. Ellie, you don't know me, but I mean, Arthur does. Like, I show up in spaces and I have a lot of energy. I always have. But on the times in which I have been more intentionally quiet, and that's something that I am working on, everyone comes to me and they're like, are you okay? What's happening in your life? And it's like, no, that's just me trying to be a better listener. That's just me. And we're not a community that accepts change well and supports it consistently. And so I liked that Friends episode because it does that. It shows exactly what not to do to your community. And yet it also shows that like, we're better in community. We reflect better of who we're supposed to be, of what God wants us to be when we are in community. And so I don't know, for the two of you, what how does community play into your understanding of change for yourself?
You know, I have found that there are New Year's resolutions that are societally acceptable, even if they're barbaric, like losing weight. Everyone's like slow clapping you and it's like, when there's a lot of shoulds, like there are acceptable shoulds. I should be doing this, I should do that, instead of being critical of that. But then other changes that I've made, people were surprisingly appalled at. Like I was a vegetarian for a very, very long time. Other people had a very hard time with that. It is not American.
I've been a pescatarian since, well, I've been a vegetarian, vegan, pescatarian, anywhere between, but I haven't had like the hard meats. January, that's the new title of this show, Hard Meats. Sorry.
The best. Nope.
But I haven't, January 17th, 2006 is the day I gave it. So we're coming up on whatever year, 15 years, I think.
15 years without the hard meats.
And I love the hard meats. And I will name that I was in LA when it started, living, back at home with my people who like, it's very easy to be a vegetarian. And I've only been a pescatarian more recently. I was a vegetarian for much longer. But then I moved to Texas and like people were just like pariah. They had no idea how to feed me per se. It's a lot of like, well, we'll make turkey. And I'm like, well, that's still meat. I just, no, thank you. And then they also don't accept the no thank yous. That's the weird part about, I think, some of this, at least I asked a question and then answered it. Please answer in both.
Oh, you're good. This is so important because that was my experience as well. It was like, and it was very good practice in just holding a mirror up to people. Like, this has more to do with you than me, And I think it's very similar with alcohol as well. Are you okay? Why have you stopped drinking alcohol? You're not going to be fun anymore. And it's like, whoa, can't we all make informed decisions about our own life? So there's certain hot button growth edges that really challenge us as a society. I find that fascinating.
I've never had anyone say, "We wish you still drank," to me. Like, I've also had nobody go, "Oh," when I talk about recovery. Like,
yeah, it's well, and I think that alcohol in particular, with some of my peers have been talking about this. People are making different decisions about alcohol with COVID, and it is acceptable to say I'm an alcoholic and I'm sober. Like that's acceptable. But if you're just trying out not drinking
if you're
alcohol,
just sober, not a recovering alcoholic,
exactly, then that's very curious to people, and it has more to do with that person's relationship to alcohol than yours, right? So I find that endlessly fascinating of what's okay to give up and then what really challenges people when you give it up.
Well,
and sorry, go ahead.
There's the traditional thing too of like people, I mean, let's get a gym membership in January. Brian and I have been shopping for an elliptical for months because we like canceled our gym membership when things started to get horrible in Sedgwick County. Not that we were using it anyways. This was months ago. It's amazing. There are none. You cannot buy an elliptical on Craigslist right now. Like they just do not exist. And we should buy them in 3 months when people are like, well, I'm tired of hanging my laundry on it. But it's, and like even talking about that, it's the trope of transformation. So.
Yeah. Yes. And it's very tiring. It was super helpful for me at one point. Did I already mention this? That like my personality over and under indulges. And so I've always tried to focus on like rightly indulging. What does that mean for me? And it's way harder for me to just live in the tension of rightly indulging as opposed to like dropping something like this black and white, like either dropping something completely or really, really celebrating it. And I think
you mean right sizing?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's what works for me about the one word is like I pick a big word that then I can kind of discern into the particulars of it in a way that feels right instead of these declarations that are really, really black and white that you're either succeeding or failing at. That to me ceases to be a spiritual practice.
Well, there's so much. That's why I don't like New Year's resolutions, because very much it expects that, like, literally overnight, or like in the course of 1 second from what was December 31st and what is January 1st, that you have become something incredibly new, capable of new things, and all
And
of
you
this.
developed the discipline and structure around which.
Exactly, which is why for me I changed it to a little bit more into the, first of all, there was, there's the lack of pressure to be like, okay, I'm doing this, this day one. Also, I don't know, for me, for years it was like, I am in, generally my January 1st are, I am in no shape to be like, let's commit to a new life. Like, that's not the way I spend my January 1s generally.
It's really nice to wake up on January 1 and to not taste like an ashtray smells.
There you go. Well, going back, I mean, we don't need to talk about it, but going back to just being able to openly talk about our boundaries is also kind of part of this. Is like, so I have a really hard and fast boundary of I don't drink alone. So for me, this year, or 2020, and this year of living in our homes by myself, I have not. I mean, I have had a couple of drinks, which is like on when someone else is drinking with me on Facebook. But other than that, I've led a really sober life these last couple of months. I am not an alcoholic, but it's like, but people are like, there's very much in the questions of like, oh, are you like sobriety? So just have a glass of wine with dinner. I was like, that just talk to me about why I've made these decisions, not the quick judgments of what it is. And I feel like that's where we're moving away from in these New Year's resolutions, where it's like, and for me, why resurrection resolutions work well, because it's like, I get to, people get to journey a little bit with me longer before I make this kind of drastic change, or not even, maybe it's a tiny change, but the change in and of itself, because people don't deal with change well. It's the reason that you don't drop an entire new, I don't know, vision for your church on January 1 without talking to your community first, right? Like, that we have to kind of be better about opening these dialogical spaces to say, like, who are we being called to be, and what are I like the idea of tiny things. What are the tiny things we need to do to get there? Or what's the one big thing that we need to do to get there? But then what are the steps we need to do? And so, yeah.
I'm breaking it up. Last year I get your bingo cards ready. I decided that I was going to do a really deep study of the first letter to the Corinthians, and I did.
What?
And it was, so I'm crazy. Like, I'm absolutely insane. I have it's not a bullet journal because I'm not basic, but it's a book that I track way too much in it, because really it's a way I do examine 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And so, like, one of the lines on this like daily tracker thing was always Bible study. And and please don't get me wrong, I study for work. I study for class prep. This was personal, for my own sake, Bible study. And I would have plenty of days where I said no. And in January, I finally had to say to myself, am I going to practice grace? Because transformation takes time.
That's right.
And I think that's part of it with the New Year's resolution. Like, I'm going to run every day beginning January 1st. And at 10 a.m., I'm going to wake up with the worst headache of my life, and I'm not going to slog and run. Then do it January 2nd. Do it January 6th.
Do it.
4th. I'm kind of hearing that with the tiny things of, like, you're expanding your roots, because then when the winds blow, the tree doesn't fall over.
You bend, but you don't break. Yeah, and I think one of the things that works about tiny things is it's easy to pick back up with grace. That if you put it down, if you don't take your 3 conscious breaths for one day, it's okay. You just do it the next day. And it's not these huge shifts, right? So it is the small R rebirth, the small R resurrection of, like, you have an opportunity every day. There's no judgment attached. But that, I do think, let me tell you about my high schoolers. So every year we would get to host this really cool conversation between these Lutheran youth and Muslim youth in Minneapolis. And they would have these great discussions. And every year, some Lutheran youth afterwards would be reflecting and be like, I kind of wish we just, like, did more. In terms of, like, they were a little tiny bit jealous of some of the commitments and practices that these Muslim youth were living, and Lutherans don't have a lot of those things, right? And so
the 5 pillars of Lutheranism are Oktoberfest,
right.
Halloween. Well, sorry, All Hallows Eve, Sola Scriptura, and whatever the opposite of syncopation is. There you
This
go.
is the most niche and funny joke that you've said
ever. And I appreciate it deeply. So yeah, it was just always really telling that spirit was brought into 12 Tiny Things of like, these young people are looking for a practice, but they want it to be tiny. They want it to, there has to be grace, but we want to come to something cyclically, and that can be every day or a couple of times a day or once a week, but that there is art and repetition. That churches really do a nice job of working ritual and repetition in to our flow. And we do want that. And we've kind of lost touch with that a little bit. And so 12 Tiny Things are, again, so small, it's not attached to the institutional church. You can try it and then see where maybe the next bigger step would be.
Was there a vision for 12 Tiny Things that was intergenerational? Thinking like, so I've got a 3.5-year-old niece who just I love dearly. I have entered into the foster parent process, and so like we'll inevitably, hopefully, have children in my own home. And so like, and as you're speaking about this, like these tiny things, 3 intentional breaths are something that we could do as a family. It's something that we, and so I like it that we can do it as a church, but it's something that we can give to our young people for some mindfulness, so that hopefully the conversation around New Year's resolutions, as it is a pop culture thing, we all ask each other, what are you doing? What's happening? It's in TV shows and movies, but that it's more dialogical, in that if this is something that works for you, like, I guess that's what I'm hearing most of it is like, lean into the things that work for you, but let's talk about them in a more faithful way so that we can show up in communal spaces to actually support and sustain them.
So,
and let's talk about it, like do it on purpose, right?
Yeah.
Don't just do it because it works for you, but notice that you're doing it, do it on purpose, talk about the fact that you're doing it on purpose. Absolutely. So I told my 6-year-old that my word for the year was love, and he decided that that would be his word too. And then he said, every year that we have together, the word is love, mama.
Oh.
Okay. All right. So my 4-year-old decided his words were going to be eat and play. Fair enough. Right. But yeah, I think that it's really really fun to be able to talk about this in a way that works for kids. So my look up, both of my boys are Minnesota boys. We go outside every single day, and it's fun to like wonder together, about the sky, and to be doing that on purpose in community. Yeah, I think that that's very important.
well, and it's funny, I was going to tell you earlier that my word this year was sandwiches. So I feel like your 4-year-old and I can be good friends.
Totally.
So there's nuance, right? There's intentionality, there's authenticity, there's vulnerability, and there's repeated failure.
Yes.
And you talked about in the opening salvas of the show the importance of communal resolution as well.
Yes.
Cultivating nuance in community is incredibly difficult. Yeah. Do you have any pointers or tips or tricks that you'd like to share with us? I don't care about our greater audience, like just us, but other people can listen too if they wish.
Well, we have people watching. My sister Lauren's on watching.
Hey, Lauren.
And someone who has committed something to us last year, but maybe his New Year's resolution will be to achieve it, is Travis Smith McKee, who we desperately need a theme song, Travis. So there's your other bingo card for the New Year, for the opening of season 2 of 2 on 1.
There you go.
Oh yeah, please change 1 Corinthians to 2 Corinthians. That's my task this year. But yes, how do you cultivate nuance?
Yeah, so a couple things come to mind. For one, the Facebook community is working because it's high accessibility and low ownership. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I am super curious about how in-person churches can you be using online communities and kind of dissolving that boundary a little bit. So what does it look like for church communities to engage in the 12 Tiny Things Facebook group and to have that common language to talk about and hold each other accountable? There's a lot of different ways you can interact on that group, and you can opt in a way that works for you and get support. I think it's super important to read the scripture together in community and have the truth be that conversation between the spirit and the text and the people gathered. Mm-hmm. And so that's another vision I have for this book, not to compare it to the Bible, but that there's discussion questions at the end of every chapter. I think it will be something you could read on your own. It will be way more fun to read it with other people and check in about having a similar theme and what their tiny thing is, and just being able to check in with each other about it. So I think having that broader theme allows for nuance within individuals where you're talking about the same thing. And one of the other things we very much on purpose took God and Jesus and some of the heavy theology language out of it, so that that circle of people gathered could be varied. And then we have a supplemental church guide that adds the Bible stories and Jesus and God back in, so that faith leaders can kind of translate in a way that's going to land for their community. So I think having something outside of this that we can be talking about and find a shared language allows for that nuance within a structure. We just tried to create a structure that had some play room in it, if that makes sense.
Ellie Roscher is the author of 12 Tiny Things, and I've written down the subtitle, and it's on a sticky note on my desk. But it is about cultivating little things, tiny things that help expand roots. It is available as of yesterday. You can find it at 12. That is, find information on ordering it at the number 12, tinythings.com. I'm bringing that up because we would play our final question theme song right now, but we don't.
But we don't have it, Travis.
Come on, Travis.
This is communal accountability.
Mm-hmm. That's really what it is.
It's really what it is. But Ellie, thank you so much for joining us. This has been just a treat to kind of really dive into. And this is, our first episode of season 2. And so a great way to start the intentionality. Maybe one of your resolutions out there is to like and subscribe and share 2-on-1 with your community. Thank you. Look at that transition.
Well done.
But as we are wont to do, and the thing that we are holding over from season 1 is our final question that, Ellie, you will get to answer first. So what biblical theme, character, story, everything from the Bible are you most reminded of in New Year's resolutions?
Okay, I thought about the Israelites. When we do a New Year's resolution, we're kind of venturing out, right? So think about the fact of like leaving slavery. That's a big first step. That takes a lot of courage. There's a wilderness section where they think that they know what they're going to get, and God gives them extremely unexpected things. And I think that's sometimes when we give up our New Year's resolution. But they weren't looking for manna, for example, and that's what they got. I love the image of the Israelites with New Year's resolutions in the fact that they needed that community to hold themselves accountable. God gives you what you need instead of what you want, and you have to adjust. And then I also love that part where the Israelites build a tabernacle together because they're complaining so much they need something to do. Right? So God gives them some directions to be like, get busy. And while they're building this tabernacle, God does not need the tabernacle, but the Israelites do. And for them to be building something together that they're proud of, that is tangible, that they can touch, that brought them together and actually built community. So I think about that in this year of our resolutions or our word, to venture out into the wilderness, look for where God is giving us unexpected signs, and to do it in community.
Okay, that's a marvelous answer, and I think there's a lot of implication about the Back to Egypt committee and skipping a run 5 days in a row. I always go before you. Would you like to go?
Sure. So for me, I had trouble with this. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, where am I going with this? And so I landed on God's covenant in the rainbow in the Noah story. That there is that when I think of New Year's resolutions, it's really a kind of covenant and commitment to myself. And in that story, what is generally not written in the scriptures is, God's kind of killed everybody, right? Like that's the kind of more challenging part of the Noah story. We love to think of the animals on the boat, but we forget the animals left behind. And so, but God makes this commitment. God changes, makes this new commitment and says, here I am to show up for you. And here's what's going to happen. And it all happens while you can kind of imagine the carnage and the chaos that are still floating around you. Right. And so when I think of the ways in which I'd like to change and grow, it doesn't mean that all of the sins and the things that I've done in my past have just gone away. I'm not in new waters, but I am floating amongst the sins of my past and hopefully creating a way that moves me forward. And so God's rainbow really for me aligns with what that means to commit into this new space, that there is a consistency and an expectability of how I should show up and will show up, and that there's still going to be the things around me that remind me of how to move forward and of what is in the past. And so for me, that's kind of where I saw this kind of newness and resolution and change happening all at once.
Beautiful. I love that.
I like that too. I'm going to go for Paul in 2 Corinthians, and I'm going to tell you exactly why.
Tell me why it's Paul.
Okay. So number one, the whole Saul Paul thing. I like the whole dramatic shift, but also Saul Paul is code switching. If he wrote to Gentile communities and he was Saul, they'd be like, what's a Saul? And if he wrote to Hebrew communities and he was Paul, they'd be like, so he's an outsider, who cares? 1 Corinthians is Paul very much being like, I'm an expert, and here's every response to every question, and let's really engage on this, and look at this, and stay as you are, and love is patient, love is kind. And 2 Corinthians is an absolute turkey shoot, because he's heartbroken, because this relationship he's built with this community is falling apart, and he's being pushed out, and he's angry and snarky, and he goes on these diatribes, and like chapters 10 through 13, which he probably wrote at the same time as Galatians, and Galatians is the one where he's like, I wish these guys would just chop it off as they talk about circumcision. Like, I know it's weird to say he's transforming, but he is. And this grace of God hasn't turned him into a saint. It's turned him into somebody who loves so deeply that these are the roots that are planted, and he's being pulled out. And one of my goals by the time we finish up this 2-on-1 project is I want Spiff to just not hate Paul.
Sorry. I'm not a huge Paul fan.
I know you're not.
But I will say that these why community is important, and why these conversations, and why I love 2-on-1 is for lots of different reasons. And mine and Arthur's just relationship is that, like, I don't hate him as much.
Well, there you go. And
I am growing, and hate is a strong word. I'm a Jesus girl. I'm just not a Paul girl. And so
I'm a Paul girl. I'm just not a Plato girl. That's my problem. Like, if we can take Plato out of Christianity, way better.
Sure. So
sorry for that one guy who was always like, why does Arthur call himself Sister Mary Arthur? I'm not scared of identifying with the feminine dude. So,
hey. Well, Arthur, if I loved all of these answers. Great way to start our second episode, or our first episode of the second season of 2-on-1. Ellie, thank you so much for joining us. Arthur, if you wouldn't mind hopping up and showing that even in season 2, there is consistency. We are still sponsored by Jeff Wenrow Design, celebrating 15 years of making ordinary time extraordinary. Go to jeffwenrow.com, as you can see on the screen, and use the code 2-on-1, all one word, for 15% off your entire Stole order.
You know, when I was working on a promo for this earlier, I was trying to figure out a way to say, like, some stuff from 2020 is still here because it's calcified into our society, and it's not like systemic economic inequality is going to vanish because the calendar changed. But you know, it hasn't vanished because the calendar changed in a good way. The 2-on-1 discount at jeffwenrow.com. But I thought it was a little too ridiculous. That's why.
Great. Well, it ended up in the episode anyway.
Yes. Ellie, it's been an honor. We have a great slate of guests kicking off 2020. And Stephanie, you have
2021. We're not going back to 2020, friend. 2021. I know. So next week. Next week, we will be joined back with Colin McCraney, which is very exciting. After that, we will be on Election Day in conversation with Shonda Jha, which, again, so excited.
No, I have to interrupt.
Please.
We're talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender with Shonda Jha. Here's the thing about Avatar: The Last Airbender. When I told Spiff about it, she goes, "Oh God, the movie." And if you know Avatar: The Last Airbender, you know why this is amazing. So Spiff is hopefully going to. We'll make a playlist. It's
we will.
But
because we will talk about my relationship to the movie later.
I'm so excited to talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender with our marvelous friend Shonda. So.
Yes, and then we have Quadri Harris coming back, and then we're gonna do with our friend Kristen is coming. We're gonna do Grey's Anatomy on the first week of February, because we have not done Grey's Anatomy yet, and she has had that on hold for a while, and we just got that, and then we start Lent with Katie Hayes, and we're talking Stephen King. That's right. So we will start those Lenten journeys with Stephen King and Katie Hayes, and I mean, what a group! So
what a group!
What a group!
You've made our 2021 just kick off with a great start. 12 Tiny Things had a huge impact, and I hope you sell out and go to numerous printings or reprintings or however it works.
Thank you. This was delightful.
Well, you are delightful, and this has been 2 on 1. We will see you next week with Colin McCraney, and until then, be well, and oh yeah, we don't have to say go vote. Thank you for voting, especially Georgia.
Hey, Georgia, I'm looking at you.